I wrote to you and asked you for a bit of information about you and particularly about your family background. And your reply was incredibly positive about your mum, your dad, your growing up family, and yet your work today is with young offenders who in many cases will not have enjoyed the kind of upbringing that you had. Can you put into context for me how incredibly important the right start in life can be and why it was really important to you?
Yeah, I was very blessed to be brought up in a Christian home with mum and dad present, and perhaps slightly less blessed at times to have my older brother present. But no, we were we were a close family, going to church and going to Church of England school and all that kind of thing. Part of a youth club, so I guess I was around faith a lot, and that was a very positive thing for me. Many of the guys and girls that we work with, we have come from broken homes where perhaps one parent, or in some cases actually both parents, are absent, and the child has been brought up not by parents but by an institution or by foster carers, and those kind of rejection issues that can form actually make a big impact. That's not to say that somebody who's had perhaps a less positive upbringing will go on to be an offender. I don't believe that to be the case at all. And there are hundreds of thousands of amazing single parents doing a phenomenal job. I volunteer on a single parent holiday with Care for the Family each year, and I see single parents doing a phenomenal job. But I do think that sometimes being from a home where perhaps a parent is absent, or there's drug abuse going on, maybe there's alcoholism, maybe there's violence, can actually cause lasting effect, lasting harm to that individual. And we can see that then played out sometimes in later life, I think.
You told me that you were part of a musical experiment whereby, at the age of just 5, you were taught to read music at the same time as being taught to read English. You also had your first violin lesson at the age of 6. Did all of that turn out to be a help and a good thing?
I think a first violin lesson at age 6 is definitely an experiment, and I'm not sure that anybody would claim giving a violin to a 6-year-old is a good thing. Even the cat used to cover its ears with its paws as soon as it saw the instrument leaving the case. But I think, music has been a part of my life for a very long time. First with the violin, and then latterly with piano, church organ, and a couple of other instruments. And so, music has been a big part of my life. I went on to do a music degree at university. And I think to some extent it kept me out of trouble. Having a hobby, having something to do with time, actually the Home Office is identified as being quite important at keeping young people off the streets and getting into trouble with gangs and that kind of thing. And so for me, I had my music, which took up quite a lot of time with bands and orchestras and that sort of thing, and indeed the friendships that came from that. It gave me all sorts of experiences that were very positive.
If you were in a chill-out time today, what kind of music do you enjoy today?
I listen to all sorts. I think you could say I have an eclectic taste. Everything from sort of modern chart stuff through to classic FM often gets played, although the adverts do tend to interrupt things. I tend to listen to whatever takes my fancy at that moment. Linda sometimes gets slightly frustrated with the bizarre things that I will select to play at different times.
Many people have influenced you over the years, but one person you mentioned particularly was Andy Hawthorne. Tell me about Andy Hawthorne and his influence.
When I was growing up, I was part of a local youth group over in Manchester, and we'd go along to various sort of Christian outreach events, gigs if you like, and he was involved in this crazy outfit known then as the Worldwide Message Tribe. And I thought they were amazing. You know, I was this sort of 13, 14-year-old kid and thought these guys had it made. These Christians on stage must be absolutely phenomenal people, and what would it be like to be doing this thing full time, working for God? And so I guess it was a bit of a kind of idol thing. Somebody, almost a celebrity at that point in my life. But actually, I now work for the gentleman, and our relationship's not at all like that. But it was actually at an event led by Andy that I gave my life to Jesus. It was I'd gone along with some other young people, and this band had performed. Andy preached, and he expressed how sometimes it can feel like life is in free fall, but actually there's a way of us being saved. And he used an analogy of a parachute and invited us to pull the ripcord on the parachute that would open a canopy of God's grace, if you like. And that was the moment for me. I'd grown up in church. I knew an awful lot about God. And I would have said that I was a Christian. I was known at school for being a Christian. But it would have been at that point that I believe I actually made a decision myself not to live out my parents' faith, which I think is very easy to do for a child or a young person growing up in church, but to make that faith my own and to make a decision for myself to follow Christ. And so, you know, following on from then, I ended up doing a gap year with the Message Trust, and I worked for them. So yeah, Andy's sort of featured heavily in that sense.
Do you think it's important that we recognise a particular time, a date, an event, when all that we talked about becomes a reality? Does that matter? Because I've interviewed people who say, I've never known anything else.
Yeah.
And other people say, I was sitting there and I just had to go forward and give my life to Jesus.
Yeah. I don't know, is the honest answer. I think for many of us, our journey of faith is just that. It's a journey. It's a process of getting to know Jesus. It's a process of accepting his love and his sacrifice and his grace and all that entails. For others, there's a line in the sand moment, and I think, you know, both are entirely valid. For many people, that moment, that challenge of decision can be helpful. Not because it puts people on the spot, but it sort of makes you think for yourself. And for me, I'd sort of drifted along, really, in terms of my faith. And so it did take that milestone, that stand up, or the come to the front, or the sort of the action in order to activate my faith. And it took a while to work out what that meant and what that would look like. But I recall that being a significant moment.
Did you feel different after that?
No, not at all.
Okay.
I think I think it, as I said before, I think it's a process. You know, change is a process, not an event. It's something I often train our staff in, that we kind of want to see change happening in those we work with as an event, but actually it's a process. And I think that's the same for each one of us. And for me, getting to know Jesus was a process, not a particular event, but it was marked with that milestone.
We've covered your growing up period, we've covered your family, the happy upbringing in childhood, and we've taken you through a period when, relatively speaking, things were fine. And then you went to Lancaster University. And it was during your time at Lancaster University that you actually hit quite a low point. I just want to read to you how you described it to me and then ask for your response. You wrote to me and said, whilst at university in Lancaster, I got involved in all sorts of ventures. I was studying for a degree, working 8 hours a week, leading groups in chaplaincy, going home on Sundays, running a youth group, attending rehearsals, and it was all too much. I found myself feeling overwhelmed, tired, tearful, and angry. I wanted to hurt someone. It was at that point that I realized something was wrong. I was diagnosed with depression, not wanting to take medication due to the stigma. I took time off work and uni and stopped doing everything. I couldn't be bothered with people, yet didn't want to be alone. Thankfully, friends supported me and sat with me despite my protestations.
Yeah.
They prayed for me and with me. There were a couple of Bible verses that helped. One that says, "Weeping may go on through the night, but joy will come in the morning." And the other was, "Cast all your cares on me, for I care for you." Yeah. You said it was a horrible time, but I learnt a lot.
Yeah, absolutely.
That experience has helped me to journey with others who were struggling with mental illness and has taught me how to better care for myself so as I don't go back to that dark place.
Yeah.
Now, I know there's a lot in that. You tell me about it.
Yeah, it was a tough time. I was doing too much. It's sort of a classic case of burnout, I think. And I found myself, it was one morning when I woke up actually feeling particularly angry. And that's not me by nature. I'm generally a fairly kind, caring sort of character. At least I hope I am. You can check it out with Linda later. But it was that moment where I suppose shook me a little bit and made me go and seek help. I was stubborn. I refused medication. I didn't want that because I didn't want to be stuck on antidepressants. But actually, they probably would have helped me at that moment in time, and that would have been a wise thing to go with the doctor's advice. As it was, I probably struggled for sort of 10, 12 weeks in total. And, you know, as I said before, there's a process, there's a journey that each one of us goes on. And I went, you know, it was a tough time where I lost motivation, enthusiasm. I was very tearful, sort of fairly classic case of depression. I praise God that I didn't go there so deeply that I would never leave it again. Some people believe that mental illness can never be cured. I don't agree with that. I am not depressed and I don't suffer with depression anymore. But equally, I recognise that each one of us has the ability to become ill. We can break an arm, it heals. We can break an arm again. And so for me, I learnt a lot. I learnt what my, I suppose what the warning signs are. And I now know that when I start getting short-tempered, if I start feeling overwhelmed, the first thing I need to do is look at the diary, and I need to remove some things from it. I need to pass some things on to one of my colleagues. I need to make some space, actually in order that I care for myself first. Because if I care for myself, then I can care for others. If I don't care for myself, I can't possibly care for others. But that experience has sort of allowed me to have an insight. I think everybody who battles with mental illness, whether it's something like anxiety, depression, stress, or if you like, the more emotive subjects, things like bipolar, borderline personality disorder, I have an insight which I wouldn't have had I not had that experience. So although it was a very difficult time, it's actually a time that has, looking back on it, I value. I didn't then, absolutely not, but I do now. And it hasn't defined me, and it doesn't define me, but it is a useful experience to me, and one which sometimes can help others as well. There are many people, in my experience, actually in our churches, who struggle with issues like depression and anxiety, yet don't want to discuss it, don't want to seek prayer for it, because there is still a social stigma around mental health, I think. And the more we talk about it, the more that stigma will reduce. And I actually went to do some training a few weeks ago to become a first aider for mental health, and I'm now able to teach it as well. So, you know, it's something which is quite important to me, and it's something we encounter a lot. in our ministry as a prisons team.
It's on the increase, isn't it, all the time? And you go into prisons and you know, you must see people suffering from the same kind of thing. It's
I don't know if it's on the increase or if it's simply that we talk about it more.
maybe.
We hear news of PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder,
Yeah.
particularly amongst veterans, amongst some of our civilian services, the police and paramedics and fire service, etc. And you know, is that a new thing? My grandparents' generation, there were things they experienced during wartime that they would never share. And I do wonder, I suppose then it was called shell shock. Nowadays we call it PTSD. I think there's a deeper understanding, and I think there's a wider acceptance that mental health is real and it's not just someone that needs to pull themselves together again. So I'm not sure whether it's on the increase or whether our understanding of it is on the increase. But certainly, you know, I welcome news of, you know, funding and projects and that sort of thing that actually helps to support those who are struggling in that area. Because actually most of us will do at some point in our lives, and having that support and understanding from friends, from other folk in church is really important.
I want to, in the second half, major on the work you do and how we can pray for you and help you, the things that you've come up against, the issues, and how you've been able to cope with people. But when we talk, our band are going to come back now because we're going to have another song now, and I asked you, was there one particular song that meant a lot to you personally? And you said to me that the song that you wanted us to sing didn't just mean a lot to you, but hearing other people sing it. Can you tell us about that now before we sing?
The song I've chosen is Amazing Grace. Very famous hymn by John Newton, and written when he had an epiphany moment. If you like, he calls himself one of the vilest offenders. He regarded himself as being a criminal, an offender, as a slave trader, and he had this moment of understanding where his attitude, his behaviour changed, and wrote this hymn, Amazing Grace. I think until you've sung Amazing Grace in a prison chapel full of prisoners, actually singing it as though they mean it, you've never sung Amazing Grace, really. And actually, I can't sing it in prison because it doesn't feel real. Whereas for those guys, it does.
Okay.
Amazing Grace.
Tim, how did you become a full-time member of the Message Trust and start to help young offenders in prisons? Because back in the year 2000, at the Message 2000 mission, I think you were personally moved, as you said, and challenged by the whole mission and the whole idea, weren't you? So how did you get involved in this?
Back in summer of 2000, I was a second year at the end of my first year of my degree, planning to become a music teacher, and was volunteering with a project called Message 2000. It was a massive youth mission across Manchester, and there was one particular project, and I was asked to go and help at this project because they were struggling with behaviour. And as I walked through the door, there was a young man, he was a 13-year-old, and he had a chair above his head, ready to bring it down onto the head of another person in the room. And as I sort of walked in, this project was in full flow, and I'd sort of been parachuted in to go and provide some support. And as I walked in, I sort of made a beeline to him, took hold of the other side of the chair, and said, let's not do that, shall we? We put it on the floor, and there a relationship started to form. And over the week, I got to know Stephen, and more and more learnt some of his experience at home, some of the rejection, some of the abuse, some of the hurt that he'd suffered, and that just broke my heart, really. And at the end of each day, I found myself actually quite tearful, just with my heart broken for this young man. And it was at that point when my attitudes really towards offenders was changed, when when I realised that no, this is an individual, and the way that the movies, the way that TV dramas portray criminals is very emotive, and my viewpoint therefore was actually that person deserves to be in prison. Lock them up. How could you love that individual? And here I was being faced with a young person who actually I did grow to love and care for, and realised, I suppose, that my attitude was wrong. And behind each individual is somebody just like the rest of us, but actually he'd had some challenging experiences. And so it was that point where I felt God called me more towards youth work, youth ministry. And then when I graduated in 2002, I did a gap year with the Message. It's now called Message Academy. Quick plug, if there's anybody here sort of in the 18 to 25 age group, you're wondering what to do with your life, it's a brilliant opportunity to be trained and equipped in evangelism, youth work, creative arts. And so I went and spent my time there. And it was from that a little while later, a job ad went out for prison outreach worker. And one of my friends called me and said, "Tim, I've seen this job. I think you should apply for it." And I said, no. And I then got another call from a second friend who didn't know the first one. "Tim, I've seen this job. I think you should apply for it." And I thought, is God trying to say something here? So I sent off for the information. In those days, you didn't just download it from a website. So I sent off for the information. They sent it back to me. I read it through and went, no. And then I got a phone call saying, "Tim, we've sent you this information pack. We'd quite like to get it back from you, please." And that was the point where I felt that to not apply for the job would have been doing a Jonah, would have been running away from what God was potentially calling me into. So it definitely wasn't my idea. It was definitely God's idea. And so I began working in prisons at the Message nearly 15 years ago now, in May 2004.
Yeah, I was going to say it was in 2004.
It's a long sentence.
And you, from that point, try and help young offenders in prison. Tell me what you feel we should know about prison life.
That's a huge question, and I'm not sure there's time this evening to properly answer it. In prison, there are an awful lot of people that are an awful lot like you and me. Actually, I think the way the media portrays those in custody is it sort of sensationalises things. And my experience is that those in custody are no different to those people that I meet in the community. It's just that they got caught and we didn't. All have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. And each one of us actually makes mistakes. And I'm not a betting man, but I bet that if I asked each person in the room to stand up if they'd ever broken this law, that law, the other law, chances are that many of us would be acknowledging things that we'd done wrong. The difference is that those things haven't led us to being imprisoned, either because we weren't caught or simply because it wasn't bad enough. But I've met people in prison from clergy to professors to Premier League footballers to 16-year-old boys that can't read or write, that have no home to go to when they get out. And so there's a whole spectrum of individuals in prison, just like there is in our communities. And there's not a lot of difference. It's not a nice place to be. There's often a perception that people go to prison to be punished. People go to prison as a punishment. And so when you hear of, I suppose, perks or nice things being done for or being allowed in prison, that's used as a way of encouraging positive behaviour. If we lock people up in a cell and we leave them there 23 hours a day and we allow them out 1 hour for exercise each day, then what we do is actually further alienate people from society. To offend against a group of people, you have to be disconnected from that group of people to a certain degree. And actually, the more we alienate people, the more we separate them from society, the more that disaffection grows, and actually the chance of reoffending increases. And so I think that the more that we can do to humanise people, to treat people with dignity, with respect, but actually also to give them a hope and a future, opportunities. And of course, the ultimate hope comes through Jesus. But there are so many people in our prisons who are working to bring about change, to bring about a hope, to bring about new opportunity. And I think it's those things that are so important to enable individuals to find hope when they're released from custody, to not reoffend and to actually make a positive contribution to society.
That leads me beautifully onto the next question, because you wrote something down, and it troubled me when you wrote it, and it's troubled me right the way through to now. This is what you said. Some of the freest people I have ever met are in prison.
Yeah.
And sadly, some of those most in prison are in churches and communities. What do you mean?
I've met people in, lots of people in prison, some of whom are struggling, some of whom have found a faith in Jesus. And that faith in Jesus has led them to being filled with the Holy Spirit and actually understanding their purpose in life. They start to see their prison sentence as an opportunity to become the man or woman that God made them to be. They begin to dream dreams about the future. They begin to make a difference where they are. Just this week, we had news of one young guy that we're working with, and he's been going into, well, he went into the cell of another prisoner who was due to go home for a day as a sort of temporary leave, and he was nervous about going home. So this prisoner went to him and said, "May I pray with you? And may I encourage you?" And he went and shared and prayed and encouraged and supported him. And that's quite a small thing, but in prison where often the attitude is every man for himself, that's massive. And so people begin to find a purpose. They begin to find their identity and their identity in Christ. And actually find a joy even in prison. And that's what I mean when I say some of the freest people I've ever met actually are in prison. But conversely, some of the most imprisoned are in prison, not just by the walls, but actually by experiences, by trauma, by bereavement, by poverty. And those issues we also find in community and in church. And of course, church is a place where we find healing, where we find hope. But not everybody is in that place right now. And there'll probably be some here tonight, actually, who feel imprisoned. Not by walls and bars and barbed wire, but by circumstance, by maybe relationships, by poverty, by bereavement, by illness. And so being imprisoned is not necessarily about walls, but being imprisoned is about, I think, a state of freedom or lack of. And we've all got a part to play in supporting those who are imprisoned in that sense as well.
You asked me for the opportunity to explain what you do as the message in prisons. Yeah. So tell me what you do, and then maybe give me an example of somebody whose life has changed. So what exactly do you do?
Yeah, we take people on a journey. And as I said before, we talked about process and change. We take people on a journey from first meeting them in prison. It might be on the prison wing. They might come into chapel to a chapel service, and we support our amazing chaplaincy teams by doing a service in each prison once a month that we work in. We do outreach events in those establishments as well, which is a chance for people to come and hear the gospel with live music of different styles, often fairly loud. If you've ever been in contact with the message, you'll understand the message is quite a loud organisation. And so we present the gospel and invite people to explore that. We meet people through courses like Peacemakers, where individuals will come along, sometimes referred by other staff, to come and explore what anger is about, what the roots and the fruits of that are, and how else we might be able to respond to it. We take people to a point of exploring faith through the Alpha course, maybe through 4 points, which is sort of just a series of little logos and symbols, really, that explain the gospel in a very, very short and easy way. And we also run what in many of our churches we would call cell groups. A cell is something different, so we don't call them that. But we do Bible study, discipleship groups in our prisons. A place to read the word together, to pray together, to worship together, to grow in relationship with each other. And then from that point, supporting that individual through the gate, back into the community, back into local churches, so that person can find a place where they belong. Their support should not, I believe, come from an organisation that they've met in prison. Obviously, we have a part to play, and we do maintain contact with each individual, but actually we want them to belong not with a prison organisation, because they're not a prisoner, but with church, because they're a brother or sister in Christ. And they belong as part of that. And so link them up into a local church for support, mentoring, discipleship. And we also run a number of businesses in the South Manchester area that are designed to provide apprenticeships, jobs, in community, with discipleship and mentoring and church and prayer, all as part of the programme, to enable those guys and girls to become the men and women that God's made them to be. Finding a job with a criminal record is really difficult. Yeah. And so giving people an opportunity to rebuild the CV and provide some stability in those first few months out of prison is really quite important.
And one particular example, can you think?
This is probably the hardest question of the whole evening, because there's dozens that I could choose from. There's a young man I'll name Mark. Mark, it's not his real name. He came to us in chapel. He was struggling with some personal issues. His family had rejected him because of his offences. And so upon release, he was going to be homeless. And he came, began to get to know him. He came on the Alpha course. He gave his life to Jesus, and he began to find hope and a sense of belonging. Joined the discipleship group, the cell group, and then upon release, we worked with him. When he walked out of that prison gate, there was nobody in the world to welcome him back. There was nobody to say, mate, we've missed you. There was nobody to put their arm around him and gave him a hug. Instead, there was me, with my prison badge on. And he walked out with 2 bin liners. That was everything he owned in the world. And he put those in my car boot, and then he just paused and said, Tim, can I give you a hug? And so with all the kind of safeguarding alarm bells going off in my brain, I thought, what the heck? Quick side hug. We got in the car, and we'd already arranged contact with a local church. He was relocating to a new city, because he had nowhere to go in his hometown, and he was going to be living in a shared house arranged by probation. And we went along, did a little bit of shopping, helped him to not spend all of his release grant. You get £46 when you're released. That's to keep you going until your benefit payment or your first payment for work comes through, which often, under universal credit, takes 6 weeks. £46. Do the maths. And so we helped him to budget that. We went along, had lunch with a volunteer mentor from church, and they welcomed him in, and they loved him. They gave him opportunities to serve and belong. They didn't see him as a project to be helped, but saw him as a valued member of their church community. And he's found a new family in that church, a new belonging, and he lives with a couple of guys from the church. He goes to various people's houses for lunch. He runs their homeless outreach project, managing volunteers from a number of churches in that city, and he's now making a real contribution. In fact, he's just become a verger in that church as well. So he's now making a real positive contribution, where he was once part of society's problems, if you like. He's now actually part of society's solutions.
Do you know what, Tim? There is absolutely no doubt that you're doing what you should be doing, because you are passionate about it and committed, and it comes over in waves. How hard is it for ex-offenders to get full-time employment today?
How hard is it for anybody to get full-time employment today? In an economy which is more part-time work, which is requiring various skills and expertise, it's very difficult for anybody to get that full-time work. Add into that the stigma of a criminal record, and it can be really tough Some do without any problem at all, but others don't. There's many who do go on to get a decent job when they're released. But without that work, there's often a lot of spare time, which isn't good for an individual emotionally, lacking purpose and all that sort of thing, but also it gives an opportunity to reoffend. If you're busy, and that busyness is providing an income, a legal income, then actually you've no reason to, or you've got much less reason to reoffend, and you've got much less time to do so. So it's a really important thing, but it's also quite a difficult thing. And one of the things I love is hearing about businesses and organisations who say, you know what, we're going to give people a chance. And Timson's is one company you've probably heard of, who they talk about, they want passionate people. They're interested in who people are, not what they can do. And they're looking at personality much more. And in fact, they've got a target to have sort of an ex-offender employed sort of in every branch and at every level of their organisation. Richard Branson has said similar. But for any business, it's a risk to take someone on. But I would challenge somebody who has responsibility for recruitment, even dare that individual to take a risk. Not foolishly, but take up references, explore, and please don't dismiss someone just because they've got a record. An individual who has been inside for drug dealing has got amazing skills in supply chain, in marketing, when it's illegal to do so. They understand profit margin. Really strong business skills. If only we could harness those skills and bring them to a more legal, more legal business. Actually, some amazing people out there.
Do you know, speaking on behalf probably of people here, there have been occasions when somebody has come to our front door with a lanyard and a thing that says, I've recently been released from prison, I'm selling these goods, can I interest you? And there is a reserve.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's hard to remove that.
Yes.
You're helping by what you're saying, but did you see what I mean?
Yeah. Crime affects each one of us. And in this room tonight, there will be direct victims of crime. And I think when you're involved in a ministry like ours, it's sometimes easy to forget the victims, and we must not. But when we are a victim of crime, and when we hear about crime, it naturally makes us fearful. And in any business transaction, we've got to be wise about it, and we've got to do the appropriate checks before we do it. So I absolutely understand that. What I would say is perhaps find out a little bit more. If they are working on behalf of an organisation, find out about that organisation and perhaps buy direct from them. You're still helping that individual, but without taking quite as much personal risk in doing so. It's a balancing act, and there's probably no easy answer to that.
Now, let's move on to you. On a personal level, tell me about being godfather to 10 children, because I'm fascinated. Do you remember all the birthdays?
So I'm godfather to 7, and I've got 3 nephews. Do I remember all the birthdays? No. But my calendar does, and that's the important thing. I remember the order of them, and I remember how old they are if I pause to work it out. But I'm afraid I don't always remember all of the birthdays. But it's an absolute delight, and a real privilege actually to be able to love and support those parents in supporting those kids. The eldest has just turned 11, and the youngest of all of that brood is 2. Yeah. So it's an absolute delight and an honour to be able to journey with those parents, love their kids, and support them in bringing them up in the Christian faith.
I know you're not married yet, but you're here tonight with your girlfriend Linda, who I met before, who works in a hostel for the homeless.
She does indeed. She does indeed. So I met Linda at the Message. She used to work in our enterprise centre, and We got to know each other over a fairly traumatic day. Lots of things hadn't quite gone according to plan, and I think you could say it was a relationship formed in battle. But Linda now, not with each other, I should add, but in trying to get the best outcomes for some of the guys that we're working with. She now works for another organisation, Langley House Trust, a Christian organisation that provides housing services primarily to homeless and ex-offenders. And so he's part of a homeless hostel up in Rochdale, looking after 40-odd men, all of whom have got complex needs. Right. But I think her gift is being really good at loving people. And she has to, because she does it with me. But actually her gift is making them feel loved and valued. And actually that brings about hope and brings about change as well.
Does help her listening to this now. Just a couple of final questions. What would you value prayer for in your work? And what would you value prayer for at the moment?
Prayer for loads of things. Volunteers. Actually, you may have heard, you may be moved this evening and think, actually, I'd like to get involved in this. Come and speak to me. Come and speak to my colleague Paul, who's here, about going volunteering. Actually, coming into prison with us. Come and get to know people.
You've got to stand with some leaflets outside.
Yes. So please do come and see us. So prayer for volunteers, prayer for finance, and again, there's people in this room who you may feel moved this evening that you'd like to get behind our work. We currently work in 5 prisons across the Northwest. We have opportunities to work in more, and we want to see more people like Mark have, experience that life change that Jesus brings. And so, please pray for funding for this work, as any charity would be asking for. But we're also working at the moment on a new resource which will enable us and help us to share the gospel more effectively, particularly with prisoners who are on short sentences or who are on remand, so they're moving through the system. And we may not have an awful lot of time to work with them. And we're finding that we don't have enough time to get them through an alpha course, and so we're busy working on some resources for that as well. So those will probably be the kind of 3 sort of big ones. I could share lots of stories of individuals as well who need prayer, but those are probably the 3 sort of strategic ones, if you like.
Okay. A final question. I asked you if you'd ever witnessed an incredible answer to prayer, and you told me about Gary. So to close, tell us about Gary and what happened.
I think I was as surprised as Gary was, to be quite honest. We'd been in an alpha session. It was in the chapel of HMP Thorncross, down the road in Warrington. And at the end of each session, we would always say, if anyone wants prayer for anything, we'd give an invitation to respond to the gospel, but if anyone wants prayer for anything, please stay behind. And he did. And I asked him what he would like prayer for, and he said, please we pray for my gran, who's not very well. Yeah, of course we will. And so there was myself and I think one of the chaplains, and we stood and we prayed for him. And as I was praying for him, and this doesn't happen with me very often, but I got a sense that there was something wrong with his knee, a word of knowledge, if you like. And so I said to him, Gary, is there something wrong with your knee? And he sort of froze and went, yeah, why? And I said, I just kind of got this sense. Trying to explain a word of knowledge to someone who isn't yet a believer can be a challenge. So I said, I just got this sense there was something wrong. And which knee is it? My right one. I said, okay, do you mind if I pray for your knee? He said, fair enough, no, go for it. And so he was sat down, and again, safeguarding. I said to him, do you mind if I put my hand on your knee while I pray for it? We're going to lay on hands and pray for you. And he was cool with that, and there were other colleagues in the room, so it's all fine. And I put my hand on his knee, and I began to pray. And as I prayed, I could feel something moving underneath my fingers. And as I finished praying, I just said, I felt something. It felt like something was moving under the skin. And he said, yeah, I could feel it too. I said, well, what happened? He said, I fell out of a tree when I was younger and smashed my kneecap, and it's painful to walk ever since. I said, okay. get up and walk. And he got up and began to walk and then began to bounce around the chapel. And it was just that these bits of bone had come back together. And I think I was as surprised as he was, to be quite honest. It's, you know, I don't have a gift of healing. I've not particularly experienced that often. But my experience has been when God has prompted me and I've stepped out. There's been times when God has prompted me and I haven't. But when God's prompted me and I've stepped out, we see things happen. And on that occasion, we absolutely saw a miracle of healing happen. And he bounced out of that chapel telling his physio that he didn't want to see her anymore. And I said, no. Go to your physio and get it checked. And then tell her what's happened.
Tim, it's been an absolute delight talking to you, listening to you.
Thank you.
We wish you every blessing in everything you do. And I know people will want to come and have a word with you afterwards. Ladies and gentlemen, Tim Mycock.